The day Private Nora Callahan showed up at FOB Kestrel, it was already a bad day. Not bad in the way that gets written into after-action reports. Bad in the small, grinding way that wears a base down, supply chain delay. Third one that month, Sergeant Briggs spitting tobacco into an empty water bottle and staring at the manifest like it had personally insulted his mother, and, somewhere across the wire, a dog barking at nothing in a way that made the hair on your arms do something. You know the feeling. You don't explain it to civilians. I was on perimeter check, boots already sucking at the clay mud that passed for a road between the motor pool and the admin building, when the transport Humvee pulled in. FOB Kestrel wasn't a big post. Helmand Province, 2019. About 60 souls, most of them Army, a handful of contractors, and Chaplain Reyes, who I'd never once seen pray but who could fix a diesel engine with his eyes closed. We were lean and we were tired and we were not in the habit of getting worked up over new arrivals. But 3 guys from 2nd Platoon were standing near the vehicle bay, and the way they were standing, leaned back, arms crossed, the posture of men who had already decided something, told me this arrival was going to be different. She climbed out of the Humvee carrying an assault pack that looked almost as big as she was. Not small, I don't mean small. 5'6", maybe. Lean in the way that desert months do to people, though she hadn't been here long enough for that, so it was something she came with. Dark hair pinned hard under her patrol cap. She had the walk of someone who knew where she was going but had decided not to look like she was rushing. The 3 guys from 2nd Platoon, Crenshaw, Diaz, and Yount watched her the way men watch things they're trying to find fault with. I kept walking my perimeter. Her name was in the manifest. I'd seen it that morning when Briggs handed me the clipboard and told me to make sure the new 68W got assigned a bunk before she got there. Callahan, N. Medical Specialist. Transferred from Fort Campbell. No combat deployment on record. That last part. That's what the boys were going to climb on. The bunk assignment put her in the female billeting, which was a tent that had been subdivided by a plywood partition, occupied until last week by a female linguist named Torres who'd rotated home. There were exactly 2 other women on FOB Kestrel. Staff Sergeant Demi Ochoa, who ran the comms section and had a look that could strip paint, and CW2 in Park, the intelligence officer, who nobody talked to much because she listened to everything and said very little. I was the one who showed Callahan to the bunk, because Briggs was still staring at the manifest. She didn't say much on the walk over. That was fine. I didn't need her to. Latrine's there, I said. Chow at 18:30. Morning formation is 05:45. Doc Reyes, the medic, not the chaplain, we got 2 Reyeses, don't mix them up, he'll orient you to the aid station tomorrow. What are they calling me already? She asked. I looked at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the bunk, running a thumb along the frame, checking for rust the way you check for problems you know are already there. Nothing yet, I said. Mum. She swung her pack off her shoulder. Give it till morning. I left her there. She wasn't wrong. By morning chow, Crenshaw had come up with something. I won't write it here. It doesn't matter and it wasn't clever. It never is. What happened next, the part that I've turned over in my head more times than I can count, started in the most mundane way possible. Uniform inspection. Lieutenant Harker, 26 years old, 8 months in country, absolutely committed to running a tight post in that performative way young officers sometimes get when they're trying to carve a reputation out of borrowed time, called an unscheduled inspection 2 days after Callahan arrived. Now I want to be accurate here. Harker wasn't a bad officer. He wasn't cruel in any deliberate way. He was the product of an environment that had certain ideas about what it meant to be hard, and those ideas included, apparently, the notion that a new female specialist who had transferred in under somewhat vague administrative paperwork was a good target for close scrutiny. He walked the line in front of 1st Platoon first. Standard stuff. Boot lace alignment. Equipment serviceability. He made Corporal Jensen drop and give him 20 for a frayed sleeve patch. He marked 2 rifles for cleaning. Then, he got to Callahan. She was standing at parade rest proper, textbook, heels together, hands behind her back. Everything about her bearing said she'd been drilled by someone who didn't tolerate slop. But Harker stopped in front of her and did something I'd only seen done twice in 3 deployments. He told her to remove her blouse. Not for any reason I could see. Her uniform blouse was clean. Pressed, even, which was a small miracle given that she'd been on post for 48 hours. The pocket stitching was intact. Her name tape was straight. But Harker said it anyway. Standing there in front of the whole platoon. Remove the blouse, specialist. I want to check the underlayer. There was a beat. That specific kind of beat that exists in military settings where something wrong is happening and everyone is calculating whether to speak. I was 3 soldiers down the line. I was doing that calculation. Callahan did not flinch. She did not look at Harker with fear or with anger. She looked at him the way someone looks at a task they've already completed in their head, like the outcome was not in question, only the mechanics. She reached up. Undid the chest buttons. Pulled the blouse off her shoulders. And the line went completely still. I had seen a lot of scars in 3 deployments. Burns. Shrapnel. The surgical kind, the clean kind that say they got you somewhere good and put you back together right. The bad kind, the kind that say something else entirely. Callahan's left arm, from just below the shoulder to the mid-forearm, was not what any of us expected. Not shrapnel. Not a burn. A pattern of scarring that anyone who'd been trained in trauma assessment would recognize immediately. Multiple lateral marks, overlapping in places, faded to white at the edges where they were oldest. Recent ones, if you could still call them that, pinkish at the borders. It was the kind of scarring that doesn't come from a battlefield. It comes from somewhere much quieter and much worse. The platoon line was silent. Harker hadn't moved. I don't know what he expected to see. A contraband tattoo, maybe. A substandard undershirt. Whatever it was, it wasn't this. His face did the thing faces do when a person realizes they have driven somewhere they did not intend to go. Callahan stood there in her brown army t-shirt, arm visible, and she did not look ashamed. She did not look afraid. She looked the way people look when they have survived something long enough to stop apologizing for its evidence. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like a geological era. Then, she picked up her blouse and put it back on. Buttoned it. Straightened her name tape. Satisfied, sir, she said. Her voice was flat. Not hostile. Not hurt. Flat the way concrete is flat. The way things that have decided not to give ground anymore go flat. Harker walked to the next soldier. The inspection continued. Nobody said a word. That evening I was sitting on the sandbag wall outside the aid station, eating the sad remnant of a protein bar that had achieved a kind of chalky immortality, when Callahan came out of the building behind me. She'd apparently been sorting supply inventory for Doc Reyes, the Medic 1, since 1600. She sat down about 4 feet away. Looked at the same patch of Hellman darkness I was looking at. You saw, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Everyone saw. Yeah. She pulled her knees up slightly. A dog, maybe the same one from yesterday, was barking somewhere past the wire again. The wind had that quality it gets at night in Hellman, dry and personal, like it knows exactly where the gaps in your gear are. You going to make it weird? She asked. I thought about that. No, I said. She nodded. Tore open a packet of instant coffee, dry, didn't mix it with anything. Just touched the granules to her tongue like it was medicine. Good, she said. We sat there for another 20 minutes. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that forms between people who have separately arrived at the same understanding. She went inside first. I finished the protein bar. Above us, the sky over Hellman was doing what it does when there are no clouds, becoming so full of stars that it looks fake, like something painted by someone who'd never actually seen the sky and was working from a description. I'd stopped being moved by it around month 3 of my first deployment. That night, for some reason, it moved me again. I don't know why I'm telling that part. Maybe because everything that came after it, the mission, the general, the moment that changed the way I understood Nora Callahan entirely, started right there, in that quiet, in that specific dark. The way things do. Before you know they've started. 3 weeks after the inspection, FOB Kestrel got a visit from someone it had no business getting a visit from. Word came through Ochoa, who got it from Park, who had presumably gotten it from a source she didn't name and wouldn't name if you asked nicely, that a general was coming through. Not a post-inspection. Not a command visit. A routing stop. The general was en route to something else and needed the airstrip for a few hours. We provide logistics support. Open the TOC, look sharp. The name circulated by Evening Chow. Major General Victor Dragici. Naval Special Warfare. 2 combat tours in Bosnia. 4 in the Middle East. The kind of record that gets read aloud in rooms where records are read aloud and causes the room to go quiet in the way that Callahan had caused the platoon line to go quiet, not from embarrassment, but from the weight of accumulated fact. Crenshaw heard the name and whistled low, which was his version of awe. Diaz looked it up on whatever database contractors weren't supposed to let soldiers look things up on and reported back that Dragici had been involved in 3 classified operations he couldn't say anything about, 2 of which were apparently famous enough among SEAL teams to have acquired informal names, 1 of which was described, in the vague phrasing of someone who had second-hand knowledge of classified material, as the kind of thing that doesn't happen and then it did and then nobody talked about it. Briggs told everyone to clean their weapons and press their uniforms and, not, under any circumstances, to say anything stupid. He looked at Crenshaw when he said the last part. The day of the visit was the kind of hellman morning that exists to punish ambition. By 0800, the heat was at full capacity. The sky was the specific white blue of maximum sun with no atmosphere to apologize for it. Everything metal was already hand-burning. The mud from the previous week had cracked into plates, and walking across the motor pool without watching your feet meant rolling an ankle on the edges. I was on the detail assigned to the airstrip when the Black Hawk came in. 2 aides first. Then, a security detail for men whose bearing told you they had not been assigned to this role. They had arrived at it through a long chain of events that had permanently altered them. Then, Dragici. He was older than his photos. 70, give or take, though the file said 68. Not large medium height, the kind of build that had been substantial once and had compacted rather than diminished with age. White at the temples. A face that had decided somewhere around 50 to simply be honest about what it had seen and to let the architecture of that show. He walked without ceremony. No pause for effect. No scan of the assembled personnel in the way that some generals do, reminding themselves and everyone else that they are being observed. He went directly to the post commander, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, shook hands, and said something too low for me to catch. I was at parade rest with the strip detail. Not the center of anything. But I was watching. The thing about FOB Kestrel was that it was small enough that a visit like this collapsed all the usual spatial separation between personnel and event. The TOC briefing, the logistics meeting, the walkthrough, it all happened within about 200 meters of everything else. Which meant that at approximately 11:40, when Dragici's walkthrough took him through the aid station compound, Nora Callahan was exactly where she was every day at 11:40. At the outdoor triage table, restocking field dressing kits. She had her sleeves rolled. I want to be precise about this because I've seen people add meaning to details that don't have it, and I don't want to do that. She wasn't making a statement. Rolling your sleeves at 11:40 in Helmand was not ideological. It was the difference between being tolerable and being miserable. Every soldier who wasn't on a formal detail had their sleeves up or their blouse open. It was a heat management decision. The scars were visible. Not dramatically. Not in the way of a reveal. Just there, the way things are there when no one is performing concealment. I saw the moment Dragici saw her. He was mid-sentence with Merritt. Something about the aid station capacity, I think, some logistics question about regional medevac support. His mouth was moving. And, then, it stopped. Not because she was a woman. Not because she was new. Not because of the scars. Because he recognized her. I could see it from 20 feet away. The recognition wasn't gradual. It landed like a step into a hole, that micro-collapse of balance when the ground isn't where you expected it. He stood there. Callahan hadn't looked up yet. She was focused on the kits, moving with the careful economy of someone trained to do small things correctly because small things done wrong in a field setting compound into large failures. Then, she looked up. And, there it was between them. Not a word. Not a gesture. Something that occupies the space before words, that exists in the prior time where two people who know something about each other are deciding what to do with that knowledge in public. Merritt said something. Dragici didn't hear it. He walked toward her. I know what I'm about to describe is going to sound, in the telling, like I understood everything in the moment. I didn't. I understood almost none of it. I pieced together the full picture later, from fragments, a conversation with Ochoa, who had spoken with Park, who had spoken with Dragici's senior aide in the context of a separate matter entirely. From Callahan herself, months later, in a different country, in a bar that had no business being as good as it was, over drinks that lasted until the staff started putting chairs on tables. But, in the moment, standing at that triage table, I understood only that something real was happening. Something that had been sealed and, carried a long distance and, was, in the particular way of sealed things in heat, beginning to open. Dragici stopped 2 feet from her. He looked at the left arm. She let him look. Callahan, he said. Sir, she said. Nothing else for 5 seconds. Maybe 6. Then, Nathan's daughter. Not a question. A recognition so certain it didn't need to be. The kind of statement that arrives fully assembled from a long time ago and requires no verification. I saw Callahan's jaw do something small and complicated. Yes, sir, she said. The general looked at her arm again. Then, at her face. Then, at something that wasn't there, or wasn't there anymore, or had been there once and had left its address. How long have you been in country? He asked. 3 weeks, sir. Your father, he started. I know, sir, she said. And, whatever he had been going to say about Nathan Callahan, whoever that was, whatever that meant, died on the other side of her 2 words. The way a door closes. Quietly, but completely. She pulled her sleeve down. Not in shame. In conclusion. I'm glad you're here, Dragici said. Genuinely. Thank you, sir. He held her gaze one more moment. Then, he straightened, turned, and went back to Merritt and the interrupted sentence, which he picked up again with the precision of a man who has trained himself to be present in whatever room he is currently in. Callahan went back to the field dressing kits. I stood in the sun and felt the specific feeling of having witnessed something you don't have the vocabulary for yet. Dinner that night was beef stew from a can, which Doc Reyes, Medic Edition, had improved by adding dried chili. Callahan was across the chow tent, eating alone, which was not her normal. She had a book open on the table but wasn't reading it. I recognized the behavior, the open book as a force field, a social signal that said I am occupied when what you actually were was somewhere else entirely. I took my tray to her table. She looked up. You going to make it weird, she said. Same question. Exact words. Same flat delivery. Probably, I said. That surprised her. She closed the book. Nathan Callahan, I said, low enough that it didn't reach Crenshaw's end of the tent. That was your father. It wasn't a question. I was testing whether we were having this conversation. She looked at her stew. You know the name? She asked. No, I said. But, Dragici did. And, that's enough to know it's worth knowing. She was quiet for a while. Long enough that I started eating so she wouldn't feel like I was waiting. My father was a Delta operator, she said finally. Retired out in 2008. He died in 2012. A pause. Small, specific. Not in any way that gets a flag folded. I didn't say anything. Because I understood the grammar of that sentence. What it meant for someone to die in a way that doesn't come with ceremony. She picked up her spoon. Stirred the stew once, counterclockwise. General Dragici served with him, she said. Helmand, 2003. Before I was old enough to know what Helmand was. She ate a spoonful. I enlisted because of my father, she said. That's the version I tell. She looked at me. The other version involves about 4 years I don't talk about. The arm is from those years. I got through them. I enlisted on the other side. The two things are connected and also separate. Okay, I said. Okay, she said. We ate the rest of dinner in the comfortable kind of silence. The kind that exists between people who have gotten through the hard part and can now just be humans eating mediocre food in a tent in Helmand province, which, when you think about it, is its own category of experience. After she left, I sat with the empty tray for a minute. The canteen generator hummed outside. Somewhere in the distance, a radio was squelching updates I didn't have the clearance or the interest to parse. I thought about Nathan Callahan dying in a way that doesn't get a flag. I thought about his daughter pulling her sleeve down in front of a general. Not in shame. In conclusion. There's a difference. It took me a while to understand it, but there is absolutely a difference. 2 days before the mission that changed everything, the FOB got hit. Small arms. Probing fire from the tree line at the north perimeter, discontinued before the QRF could get a fix. 2 minutes of noise and, then, the particular silence that follows fire, which is its own kind of noise, everyone checking themselves, checking the man to their left, processing the adrenaline that came in high and, fast and, has nowhere useful to go. No casualties. 3 rounds found metal. 1 found Corporal Jensen's gear bag, which was hanging on the outside of the motor pool wall and, therefore could have been Jensen if Jensen had been standing there, which he had been, until approximately 90 seconds before. Jensen did not speak for a while after that. He held the bag in his hands and looked at the hole. Callahan was the first one to him. Not because she was on duty. Because she had seen the look on his face and moved before anyone else processed what the look meant. She took the bag gently from his hands. Hey, she said. Look at me. He looked at her. You're here, she said. Right here. Feel the ground. He pressed his boots into the cracked mud. Did what she said. Breathe, she said. He breathed. I watched this from across the motor pool. Watched Nora Callahan talk a 22-year-old corporal back from the edge of wherever near-miss shock takes you, using nothing but her hands and her voice and the particular steadiness of someone who had, at some prior point, needed the same thing done for them and remembered exactly how it felt when it was done right. Jensen wasn't the same kid after that probing fire. But he was functional. He was present. He made it through the mission that came next. Some of that was Callahan. I don't know how much. It doesn't matter how much. Some. The mission briefing came at 0200. That hour. Not by accident. Merritt's philosophy was that if you briefed at 0200, the fatigue sorted the men from the men who could override fatigue. He was probably right. It was also, objectively, a brutal thing to do to people who'd already logged 16-hour days. The op was a cordon search of a compound 4 clicks northeast, flagged by Park's intelligence section as housing an IED cache significant enough to matter. Not a HVT capture. Not a complex assault. Ground up, systematic, supported by 2 gun trucks and a pair of AH-64s on standby at a firebase 40 minutes out. Callahan was attached to the medical element, which was SOP. She'd ride in the second vehicle, stay back at the cordon perimeter unless there were casualties. Her job was to be ready. To have everything in the right place and to not need to be told where things were when the seconds started counting. She didn't say anything at the briefing. She sat in the back row and listened with her elbows on her knees and her face doing that thing where all the information goes in and nothing extraneous comes out. Harker was giving part of the briefing. Route intel, sector assignments. He had not spoken directly to Callahan since the uniform inspection. She had not sought him out. There was an arrangement there, unspoken, that both parties had apparently decided was workable. The briefing took 45 minutes. Questions. Contingencies. Comms check protocol. Rules of engagement that everyone already knew and that needed to be said out loud again anyway because the saying of them was itself part of the thing. By 03:15 we were mounted. For clicks in the dark takes longer than it sounds. The road, and, I use the word charitably, switched between packed dirt, loose rock, and sections where the drainage runoff had carved channels that the gun trucks took at angles that sent loose equipment sliding. I was in the second vehicle with Callahan and 2 other soldiers, Privates Moreno and Sutton, who had 2 deployments between them and were therefore the quiet kind of experienced, the kind that doesn't perform. Nobody talked much. The engine noise and the radio traffic filled the space. At one point Callahan pulled the Velcro tab on her medical bag and sorted through it in the dark by feel alone. I watched her hands. Efficient. No wasted motion. Finding things that were exactly where she had put them, which they were because she had made sure they were. She caught me watching. Nervous habit, she said over the engine. Doesn't look nervous, I said. That's the point of the habit, she said. The compound was a series of mud brick structures around a central courtyard, surrounded by a wall that had been repaired in patches over apparently many years, visible even in night vision as a patchwork of old material and new. 3 structures. Outer wall gate on the south side. Agricultural plot on the north, dry and cracked, serving as our left flank. The cordon went up without incident. First element through the gate. Sector clears called over calms in the flat, businesslike cadence of people who have done this enough times to have drained it of drama. South structure clear. Outer courtyard clear. I was at the gate perimeter when the north structure found the cache. And also found the man who was guarding it, who had not been in the intelligence picture, which is its own statement about the limits of intelligence pictures. He came up firing from the ground floor window. 3, 4 shots, controlled, not panicked, which told you something about his training. The noise in an enclosed compound is its own creature. It bounces and doubles and arrives at your eardrums from directions that don't match your eyes. 2 soldiers went down. Not dead. I didn't know that in the first second. In the first second there were just people on the ground and other people who were not on the ground and gunfire and then return fire and then the specific compressed chaos of a contact you didn't fully anticipate. The shooter was neutralized by Moreno, whose reflexes I have subsequently described to exactly 0 people who would understand what it meant that he got the angle he got from where he was standing. The word neutralized in this context means he is not a concern anymore. That's all I'll say about it. I was already on the radio. Callahan was already moving. Here is what I need to say clearly: she ran toward the sound. Not because she was ordered to. Not on a delay where she processed options and chose. She ran toward it the way bodies move when decision and action have been compressed through repetition into a single thing. She was at the first casualty, Private Yount, who had caught fragments in the upper right arm and was making the noise people make when adrenaline starts wearing off faster than pain does, before the sector was even fully secured. Yount. Look at me. Yount. She was already cutting. I moved to cover her. The compound had gotten quiet in that held breath way that follows contact, everyone repositioning, no second shooter located yet, but nobody willing to assume there wasn't one. She worked. I'm not going to describe it in the way that turns medical work into drama, because it isn't drama, it is technical, careful, fast, and mostly quiet. She called for what she needed and Moreno got it to her and she applied it and moved on. Second casualty, Specialist Weir, who had taken a round through the lower leg and had gotten himself to the wall and was sitting with his back against it, rifle still pointed outward, which told you what kind of soldier Weir was. The round had found the fibula. Clean entry, rough exit. He was maintaining blood pressure through his own body chemistry and stubbornness. You're okay, she said. Not to comfort. As information. I know I'm okay, he said. Hurts like a son of a yep, she said. Tourniquet. Tell me when it bites. There. Right there. Good. That's working. He leaned his head back against the wall. Don't go to sleep, she said. I'm not going to sleep. Good. Keep your rifle up. He kept his rifle up. The AH-64s were now audible, that particular whump-whump that changes the math of any ground situation they're approaching. The firebase had scrambled them on the first radio call. 40 minutes, they'd said. It had been 31. Merritt came over comms. All sectors clear. Cache confirmed. Medevac being requested for 2 casualties, non-critical. Begin consolidation. I let out a breath I had apparently been keeping in reserve. When the medevac landed 20 minutes later in the agricultural plot, which was flat enough and clear enough, barely, for the UH-60 to settle, Callahan was the one who walked out and, we're to it. A hand on each one, not supporting them physically, just present. The way you walk someone to a door and stand there until you hear the lock. She handed the flight medic the casualty cards she'd written during the wait. Medications administered. Tourniquet application time. Vitals trend. The flight medic looked at the cards. This is good work, he said. Not a compliment. A professional assessment. Thank you, she said. Professional in return. She walked back to where the rest of us were consolidating gear. Her left sleeve had come up at some point during the work. The scars visible under the pale wash of the moon and the chemical glow of a pair of chemlights someone had cracked near the vehicles. She didn't pull it down. She walked back to the vehicle and lifted her medical bag into the truck. Nobody said anything about it. Not Crenshaw. Not Diaz. Not Yount, from his stretcher. Because 4 hours ago it might have been a thing that invited comment. And now it wasn't. Because now we had seen what she did with those hands, and whatever the hands had been through, whatever had been done to that arm in the years before Helmand, was now simply the history of something that had arrived here and did this. That's not me being poetic. That's just what happened. The debrief was at 0900, running on no sleep and cold coffee and the specific alertness that follows a long night and doesn't quite feel like energy. Merritt ran it. Harker took notes. Dragici was technically still on post, his departure had been delayed by weather at his next stop and attended, which meant the room straightened and stayed straight. Callahan sat where she sat at every briefing. Back row. Elbows on knees. Merritt worked through the timeline, the contact, the casualties, the consolidation. When he got to the medical response, he said, Specialist Callahan provided immediate, effective aid to 2 casualties under conditions that were not fully secured at point of treatment. Time to tourniquet on Specialist was logged at under 90 seconds. Casualty cards were documented, accurate, and complete. He paused. That's the standard, he said. That's what we train for. He looked up from his notes. Well done, Specialist. Thank you, sir, she said. Flat. Neither deflecting nor absorbing. From the chair along the wall where Dragici was sitting, observing and, not speaking, the posture of a general who has learned that the most useful thing a senior officer can do in a debrief is watch, there was no visible reaction. He was looking at Merritt's notes. But, after the debrief, when we were filing out, when the tent had mostly emptied and the day was doing what Hellman days do, which has become an argument against being outside, he stopped near the exit. And he looked at Callahan, who was nearest to him as she headed out. He said something I almost missed. Your father was the best medic I ever served beside, he said. Quiet. Not for the room. Just for her. Bar none. In conditions I can't describe in this building. Callahan stopped. She didn't turn immediately. There was a moment where she was holding something, deciding something. Then, she turned. He told me once, she said, that the ones you lose stay with you longer than the ones you save. Dragici held her gaze. He was right, he said. A beat. Long and specific and full. I know, she said. She walked out. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I say that, but I do know. I'm telling it because I was there, and being there for something means you carry it, and carrying it means eventually you have to put it somewhere or it starts to change the way you walk. Nora Callahan. FOB Kestrel. Helmand Province, 2019. She was in country for 11 months total. She treated 47 casualties, 6 of them critical. She was recommended for a commendation by Doc Reyes, Medic Edition, and the paperwork got bogged down in the administrative process that grinds paperwork into silt, which happens to a lot of paperwork and a lot of people in a lot of wars. I ran into her once after we were both out. Different city. She was working at a VA clinic, which I will tell you felt exactly right for reasons that are obvious and, for one reason that isn't, she had the specific capability of sitting with someone who was in pain in a way that didn't demand the pain performed for her. She could just be in the room with it. That's rarer than it sounds. She had her sleeve up when I saw her in the clinic hallway, talking to a veteran who had his own set of visible history burns along his neck, the right side of his face. They were talking about something ordinary. A form. A referral. Whatever the daily mechanics of that place involved. She looked comfortable. Not repaired. Not finished. Comfortable, the way things that have been through a process and have come to terms with that process become comfortable. Like an old building that's been restored rather than replaced. The history is still in the walls. The building still stands. I didn't interrupt. I signed in at the desk and took a seat and looked at the institutional tile floor and thought about a debrief room and a general who said bar none and a woman who said I know without letting it crack her. The tile floor was the unremarkable beige of every government facility since the beginning of time. I looked at it for longer than I needed to. Parker, for what it's worth, put in for a transfer 4 months after the mission. He ended up at a training command in Georgia. I heard from Ochoa that he'd become a decent instructor. That he ran tough inspections but fair ones. I hope that's true. People move in the directions the things they've experienced push them. I've seen it go the wrong direction more often than I'd like. But I've also seen it go right. Crenshaw stopped calling her what he'd called her on day 2. Stopped around the time of the cash mission and didn't start again. Whether that was conscience or pragmatism or the specific recalibration that happens when you watch someone do something at 0300 that you're not sure you could have done, I couldn't tell you. Doesn't matter much which one it was. The dog that kept barking past the wire. I never found out what it was barking at. That's the kind of thing that stays with you. The unresolved peripheral thing. The mystery that was probably nothing and might have been something and will now be permanently undetermined. I still think about that dog sometimes. What I know about scars, they are the body's record-keeping system. They are the physical answer to this happened here. They don't narrate or explain or ask for pity. They just say, here. This place. Something occurred. What I know about Nora Callahan, she arrived at FOB Kestrel carrying a history that other people would have either hidden or weaponized, and she did neither. She just carried it the way you carry your gear, present, functional, yours. What I know about her father, Nathan Callahan, almost nothing. A name. A second-hand account of excellence in conditions that can't be described in a particular building. A general who froze at a triage table and found himself looking at a dead man's legacy in a living woman's arm. What I know about war, it is full of these moments. Where you see somebody whole for the first time because the pressure of the situation has stripped away every layer that wasn't structurally necessary, and what remains is the actual thing. The actual person. And you realize you had been looking at their surface the entire time before that. The uniform inspection. The triage table. The debrief room. Each time, a layer came off. Each time, what was underneath was harder and more functional and more genuinely itself than the layer before it. By the end, she didn't need anyone to see her as anything other than what she was. She was a medic in Helmand Province. She was Nathan Callahan's daughter. She was someone who had been through a specific dark and come off the other side, not unscathed, not without evidence, but out. The arm was not a wound anymore. It was a record. And it had earned its place.